not because they're not part of the sort of dominant narratives, of this moment. But I should also add that I think one of the challenges that I faced is when you have a certain segment of, let's say, white liberals or centrists who are misreading a Black writer's work, and then through that misreading are positioning that person in a particular form of spotlight. And then others who have deep criticism of white liberalism sort of see them spotlighting, and then they start criticizing that author's work who they haven't read themselves. Or they hear those misreadings and take them to be true, as opposed to going to the source, even as they imagine themselves as critical white liberals. So they take white liberalism's narratives, believe it about Black writer, as opposed to going to the source themselves, which to me is in direct contradiction. But I want to actually, I'm curious because I know you have a book coming out.
And you do too.
Yeah,
right.
And I haven't. I've seen the cover, which is fire. So, what is it? What is it about?
I was about to ask you the same thing about your new book. Well, I appreciate you asking. I think in this moment, we have to risk everything on the page if we're going to bear witness to the times that we're in. We have to allow our pens to do the work that they're supposed to do as witnesses, to put it in a different way. So this book is really, we're in a moment in the 250th where we're going to be drowning in these attempts to account for the founder, these stories about our beginnings. And so I was trying to figure out how to write the 250-year history of the country without writing a 250-year history of the country. I'll leave that to you guys to do that work. So I decided to look at the milestone anniversaries. 1876, 1926, 1976, up to 2026. In each of these milestone anniversaries, the country has to tell a story about itself. And in each of these moments, race, us, confounds the nation. 1876, the violence of the collapse of Reconstruction. 1926, the nativism, the age of the Klan, the violence of that period. 1976, the anti-busing movement, and a range of other things that were happening. So what I'm trying to do is to tell the story of the nation's storytelling, right? America, USA, how race shatters the nation's anniversaries. Grappling with this cycle. This is why I was pressing around sentimentality and rage. And I actually invoke a sentimentalist reading of how to be anti-racist in the text, right? Because what happens, in my view, is that we find ourselves in this cycle, right? When, as a chapter entitled, "Freedom is the White Man's Gift." So freedom is that which white men or white people think they possess to give and to take away. And so they give in these moments of sentimentality. What can we do for them? They cry. Baldwin has this, when you read Baldwin's corpus, he talks about the wet eyes. And sentimentality for him is a mask for cruelty. And so you get this sentimentalist expression. Right? What can we do in order to end the anti-slavery moment? And then soon as slavery is in, the passage of the Civil War amendments, we'll talk about them actually voting, this sort of thing, things that happen. So we find ourselves moving from sentimentality into white rage, to use Carol Anderson's language. And so the book is really kind of trying to chart the repetition, the echo, that which is wholly unprecedented, but entirely familiar at the same time. And me trying to grapple with the fact that in the 250th year of the country, we have to deal with this. Stop the beer. So the book is angry. I do a lot of source material, his historical work in the archive, rereading the archive. It's a kind of quilt, right, of somewhat of the shall we say, the discarded pieces. And what's important is how we're threaded all together. Now you're writing about great replacement. What made you, okay, you gave us a sense of from stamp to how to be an anti-racist, right? Here you get the denialism over here, right? And then you want to try, okay, if you're not this, you want to do this. And then you do. Now, where does this book on great replacement fit?
So, well, it's interesting because you spoke about this transition from sentimentality to rage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that I attempt to do in Chain of Ideas is to show from an ideological standpoint how that transition ended up happening. Which is to say, I think one of the main sort of storylines of that book is showing how great replacement theory fuels the rage.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really, I think, after 2020, I was trying to grapple with the emergence of this construct of anti-whiteness and this increasing propagandic idea that anti-whiteness was becoming the sort of defining oppressive system of our time, like not anti-blackness. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Of course.
And so I started to try to investigate that. And certainly those talking points were specifically meant for white people and were particularly served up to white people by people who were seeking a new way to dominate and exploit white people and the rest of us. And so I started to investigate, like, where did this come from? And the more I studied that construct of anti-whiteness, the more I eventually landed at great replacement theory. And as I started to research and study great replacement theory, it ultimately brought me around the world. And so the term, the great replacement or great replacement theory, emerges from a French novelist named Renaud Camus, who wrote a book called The Great Replacement in 2011. He named a theory that had been around for quite some time.
It's grim. It's Stoddard. We've seen this stuff in the 20s, right?
Exactly.
Early teens.
And that is a function of how ideas operate. Ideas are not like humans, in which most humans are named even before they're born, if not, a week after. Typically, ideas are not named, so to speak. It may not be named for 100, 200 years after they start circulating. So that certainly was the case with great replacement theory. And so the book chronicles the resurgence of great replacement theory in the United States and around the world over the last two decades. And this theory, just so we can sort of level set, I define it as a political theory that suggests these powerful elites for enabling, let's say, Black and brown people to displace the lives and livelihoods of white people who apparently now need authoritarian protection. And so when we hear notions like people from Africa and Asia are poisoning the blood of the nation, that's an example of great replacement theory. When we hear ideas like immigrants are invaders, that's an example of great replacement theory. When we hear ideas like diversity programs are discrimination. That's an example of great replacement theory. When we hear ideas like the white race, due to its low birth rates, are dying out, that's also an example of great replacement theory. And what was striking in studying in writing about this theory is how it actually connects the demonization of immigrants to the demonization of, let's say, African Americans. And to give probably the most obvious example, the young white male who shot up that supermarket in Buffalo, New York, wrote a manifesto. And in that manifesto, he described African Americans as the most visible set of replacers, literally. And that he was seeking to annihilate us before we annihilate white people, which of course harkens back to the logic of Confederates and enslavers and Jim Crow segregationists and those who opposed decolonization and Nazis and this sort of cocktail of some of the most horrific and violent and dangerous racist ideas, so all wrapped up in one. And finally, the book chronicles how elected officials, not just the Trump, we as Americans, particularly being focused on this nation state, can imagine that sort of that Trump and Trumpism and his ideas, that it's sort of coming out of his own demonic sort of ways. And so we're really missing, which doesn't allow us to see how this regime has literally used the playbook of authoritarians like Orban in Hungary, or Putin in Russia, or Bukele in El Salvador, or Modi in India, typically sort of framing Muslims or Black people or indigenous people or feminists or queer people or ethnic minorities as these replacers. So therefore, they need to do away with civil liberties and rights in order to protect the, quote, privileged or majority groups. So that's what the book sort of chronicles. It's a pretty devastating analysis. I seek to show how great replacement theory has become the most dominant political theory of our time. When we look at the power, frankly, of these heads of states and these major opposition leaders who are deploying this theory to build or maintain their racist dictatorships, whether conventional or electoral, and how it's even caused some Black people to believe it. You have African Americans who believe that Black immigrants are coming to take their jobs. And that's how insidious ultimately this theory is.
So how do you see, and then I want to pivot after I ask this question too, because I want to get at something else. How do you see this particular work working? What do you think? I mean, so, we, like I said, our pens have to do some work in this moment, right? What do you see? What do you take telling this story in this moment to be doing? What do you hope to achieve?